Hi everyone, and welcome to the very first module of the Alzheimer's prevention course. I have created this module as the foundation, as the building block for the other modules, as we are going to discuss about what Alzheimer's is, why it is a truly unique disease, the so-called amyloid theory and why we really need to see the bigger picture, the contributing factors to the onset of Alzheimer's, and finally, how all this circles back to prevention. So let's get started. For anyone who has dealt with Alzheimer's, they would probably use words like devastating, heartbreaking, and terrifying to describe the insidious ways in which this still mysterious disease ruthlessly and gradually robs people of their past, their present, and their future. I still vividly remember the first time I visited a nursing home. At the time, my mother was approaching the advanced stage of the disease, and committing her into a nursing home had become an unavoidable yet heartbreaking reality that I couldn't just wrap my brains around it. As we moved from patient to patient, some of them happy that someone was visiting them and interacting with them, others too sedated to be aware of anything around them, I had this overwhelming feeling that Alzheimer's is a unique disease, unlike any other. All those patients used to have a life, relationships with their loved ones, a career, hobbies, memories, and now they were captive in those fragile bodies, in a wheelchair, captive in a reality that no longer made any sense to them and frightened them beyond despair. I truly believe Alzheimer's is a unique disease for three main reasons. The first one is that Alzheimer's is now the third leading cause of death after cancer and heart disease, for which there is no current pharmacological treatment nor any clear direction for advancing research and development. If for diseases such as cancer, some progress has been made, or at least there is some clear directions for steering research and development, in Alzheimer's the situation looks rather desperate. The current drugs are not doing anything to slow down cognitive decline, and for the last 30 years, no new drugs were put on the market because clinical trials ended in failure. I would like to mention here two new drugs. The first one is Aduhelm. It was launched in 2021 when the drug received an accelerated approval from the FDA, and ironically, only 1 month after the approval was granted, the FDA came back on its approval to modify the indicated therapeutic use to cover only very moderate stages of Alzheimer's, as the drug failed to show its supposed efficacy. The second drug is a very recent one. It's called lecanemab, and I read about it about 2 weeks ago, and apparently it managed to slow down cognitive decline by 38% throughout a period of approximately 4 months. And this is encouraging, but for anyone who has dealt with Alzheimer's, it is clear that it is moderate good news. What we need in Alzheimer's is not another drug that tries to slow down cognitive decline for a while. We need a comprehensive treatment that reverses cognitive decline and gives the patient the chance to go back and live a normal life. The second reason Alzheimer's is unlike any other disease is because it's the only mortal disease that depletes patients of their humanity on all possible levels, physically, intellectually, and emotionally. And thirdly, Alzheimer's disease bears an emotional toll on caregivers and family, which is absolutely phenomenal. And this is why many caretakers develop severe anxiety and depression throughout the very extensive period of 8 to 12 years of caring for an Alzheimer's patient. In the next section of this module, I would like us to talk about the so-called amyloid hypothesis and why we need to see the bigger picture. In my opinion, Alzheimer's resembles this huge and complex puzzle. And the amyloid hypothesis is just one piece of this puzzle, and there are several others. Dr. Dale Bretson, a renowned integrative doctor that obtained an incredible success rate in treating Alzheimer's in certain cases, says that Alzheimer's is like having 36 holes in the roof of your house. And this is what I mean by a giant puzzle made up of several pieces. And the reality is that pharmaceutical companies exclusively and religiously focus their efforts on the amyloid hypothesis. And this could be the explanation as to why all the clinical trials so far ended in disaster. Because there is a bigger picture that the companies have not seen yet. And this bigger picture has been acknowledged by integrative doctors like Dr. Dale Bretson that realized that the only manner of treating Alzheimer's is with an integrative protocol that comprises several changes in the lifestyle, in the nutrition, and in the physical exercise routine of the patients. But what is this beta amyloid hypothesis? The short answer is that Alzheimer's is considered a neurodegenerative disease caused by an abnormal accumulation of beta amyloid, which destroys synaptic connections, which results in the death of the brain cells and the atrophy of the brain. There is another mechanism implicated in Alzheimer's, and that is the entanglement of another protein called the tau protein. And what this simplistic definition of Alzheimer's tells us is that the accumulation of beta amyloid is responsible for Alzheimer's. But what is this beta amyloid? Beta amyloid, it represents a fragment. So we have here beta amyloid, yes. And it represents a fragment of a bigger protein called amyloid precursor protein. And I'm going to be referring to it simply as APP. And without entering into too many technical details, it is important to understand that APP is a dependence receptor protein. What does it mean? It means that the APP has to be combined with another protein in order to signal the brain cell to live or to die. And yes, it sounds a little dramatic, but it is actually part of a rather normal neurological process. When the APP encounters netrin-1, I hope you can see here, netrin-1. If it's too technical, just please bear in mind that netrin-1 represents trophic support. So it's something that helps brain cells survive and grow. This is, let's say, a match made in heaven, because the APP will be divided into two smaller fragments. And this means that the brain cell is going to survive, is going to live. And this is what we want, our brain cells to thrive and survive. On the other hand, there is another less fortunate possibility. And that other possibility is that APP combines with another beta amyloid fragment. And this happens when there is too much beta amyloid released in the brain. And this increases the likelihood for the APP to combine with another beta amyloid protein. And when this happens, let's call it a match made in hell to differentiate from netrin-1. When this happens, the APP is divided into 4 smaller fragments. Ironically, one of these 4 smaller fragments is another beta amyloid. So this is a vicious circle that results in an ongoing accumulation of beta amyloid. So exactly what happens in Alzheimer's, yes? The buildup of beta amyloid, the formation of plaques, the destruction of synapses. But now the question is, why is there so much beta amyloid in the brain? Yes, because if there is no beta amyloid, then there is an increased chance for the APP to find the perfect match, netrin-1. Beta amyloid is in fact part of a normal process that happens in the brain. When the brain is faced with an infection, let's call it an invader or an attack, and it does not have sufficient trophic support, so it does not have sufficient nutrients to counterattack, to fight off the attack. It has to shut down certain non-vital functions. And beta amyloid is the agent of self-destruction, or the downsizing agent, if you want a corporate term. So the brain it makes this assessment and decides, I don't have enough resources to fight these invaders. I'm going to have to shut down a part of my functions. I'm going to send the beta amyloid as the firing agent, yes. And the beta amyloid is released, and its job is to shut down, first of all, non-vital functions such as thinking, reading, writing, problem solving, planning, because in the brain's hierarchy, these are non-vital compared to the vital ones, which are breathing, walking, eating, body temperature control. The problem in Alzheimer's is that the inflammatory process, so the invaders, this attack from the invaders, is ongoing. Therefore, the brain is forced to send out a lot of beta amyloid all the time. And even if the downsizing, the firing, let's say, begins with non-vital function, eventually the vital functions also need to be compromised. And this is what happens in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's. So to sum up what we've discussed, beta amyloid is a fragment of another protein, which is the amyloid precursor protein, APP. And the APP is a dependence receptor. It can be combined with a trophic support factor, and it's anti-Alzheimer's, or it can be combined to another beta amyloid fragment, and then it has a pro-Alzheimer's effect, because the result is to produce and to release more beta amyloid into the brain. However, please remember, beta amyloid is part of a normal process. It's part of the brain's inflammatory process. So it's defense against infections and pathogens. However, if the inflammation is continuous, then the beta amyloid accumulates in an abnormal manner. And I hope this was clear enough. In the next section of this module, I would like us to talk about the causes of Alzheimer's, because this accumulation of beta amyloid is the result of the process. Yeah, it's not the process itself, it's the result of a process. And I would like us to start by discussing the causes for inflammation. Then I would like us to discuss trophic deficiency as another contributing factor for Alzheimer's, intoxication with heavy metals, traumatic brain injury, heart disease, and then finally depression. But let's start with the causes of chronic inflammation of the brain. The first one is a leaky gut, and I'm sure that many of you know what a leaky gut is. It's an increased permeability of the small intestine, which allows small food particles, residue, toxins, bacteria particles to reach the blood, and from the blood they can reach the brain via a disrupted, ill-functioning blood-brain barrier, a process that was considered impossible by scientists until not so long ago, but now has been fully validated. Another important factor of inflammation is represented by an infection with pathogens. It's really an important one. And I will provide here the ones that I identified in my research. The first one would be the herpes virus family, and this comprises the herpes simplex 1, the human herpes virus 6, and the most feared one, in my view, Epstein-Barr virus. Another example of a pathogen, a very dangerous pathogen, is Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori. And this is a bacteria found in the gut. It is responsible for gastritis, but apparently it has this capacity of reaching the blood and via a disruptive blood-brain barrier reach the brain and cause inflammation. Other examples are hepatitis C virus, C. pneumonia virus, spirochetes. Spirochetes are the one that cause Lyme disease, yes, and have also been associated with an increased risk for Alzheimer's. Mold, also, this one is very important because there could be a lot of mold in our homes and we may just as well not be aware of it. So it's very important to check the levels of mold in your home, because mold produces mycotoxins, and mycotoxins result in chronic inflammation of the brain. Examples of mold are Aspergillus, which it grows in human tissue, and it is especially dangerous in case of a compromised immune function. And toxic black mold, which is found in water damaged buildings. And finally, Macron. And Macron has nothing to do with the French president. It's just an abbreviation of the staph infection. Staph infections have also been associated with an increased risk for Alzheimer's. And these are basically the pathogens that I came across in my research, and that according to studies and clinical trials have been linked to Alzheimer's. Another category is type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. This insulin resistance causes chronic inflammation in the brain. And I know that in the media, Alzheimer's has been promoted as type 3 diabetes. And while I'm happy that there is awareness about this subject, please bear in mind that insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes is not the only cause of Alzheimer's. And this is in essence what I wanted to say about the chronic inflammation of the brain. And I was very at first intrigued and then pleasantly surprised to learn of an innovative company, American company. It's called ImmuneBio, and it is developing drugs exclusively for two diseases, Alzheimer's and cancer. And as regards Alzheimer's, it is developing a drug that is supposed to target chronic inflammation in Alzheimer's patients. And the drug would accomplish this by targeting in a selective manner the soluble TNF, the tumor necrosis factor, a very powerful cytokine which is involved in inflammatory process. And I'm actually monitoring the clinical trials regarding this drug, and I will publish something on my Facebook or Instagram page as soon as I have news. Another important contributing factor to Alzheimer's disease is the intoxication with heavy metals, and this is one that unfortunately I'm quite familiar with because my mother had it, and I suspect it was a main cause for her Alzheimer's, as when we tested her for mercury, she had levels off the chart, effectively off the chart of mercury. And what I would like to say about the intoxication with heavy metals is that it is responsible for a very severe, and I would even say dramatic form of Alzheimer's, and it's quite atypical. The onset is rather early, late 50s, early 60s, and the first symptoms are quite unusual. Cognitive deficit, for example, spatial orientation, thinking, writing, problem solving, planning, and then memory loss occurs. And when memory loss occurs, this also happens in an unusual manner because both short-term memory and long-term memory are affected at the same pace. As you know, in Alzheimer's patients, usually short-term memory is first compromised and then long-term memory, and it has to do with the process that I described, that the brain has to make a hierarchy and to decide between functions that it considers more or less vital. So the brain considers that our old memories are more important than the short-term ones. What are the heavy metals associated with Alzheimer's? So first of all, mercury. Organic mercury that comes from contaminated fish. I'm going to write them here. So mercury, I hope you can see my handwriting. Organic and non-organic, cadmium, lead, arsenic, and possibly also aluminum, but the jury is still out on that. The next contributing factor to the onset of Alzheimer's is traumatic brain injury. And while there seems to be a very complex relationship between traumatic brain injury and neurodegenerative disease, the scientists have not yet fully elucidated this connection, but it is believed that the cerebrovascular pathology, which is a key element to both diseases, leads to an accumulation of the acceleration of the accumulation of beta amyloid and the onset of dementia. Another important contributing factor to Alzheimer's is heart disease. And I would like to mention here the studies and the groundbreaking discoveries of a cardiologist, a famous cardiologist named J. Andrew Armour. And what he discovered is that the heart has its own nervous system. So the heart has its little brain, which comprises no less than 40,000 neurons, which are pretty much similar to the neurons in our brain. Also, what is fascinating is that there is a two-way communication between the heart and the brain. And therefore, it should come as no surprise that the health of the heart has a direct impact on the health of the brain. And heart disease, angina, stroke, mini stroke considerably increase the risk for dementia. According to statistics, 25% of all dementia cases are attributed to heart disease. But even this is something quite worrisome, I would still nevertheless like to emphasize the beautiful discovery that the heart has its nervous system, has its little brain. And I invite you to further explore this scientific discovery because I believe it has incredible consequences for us. And now, finally, the last contributing factor to Alzheimer's is depression. And there are two hypotheses that depression, so I'm going to write it here. As I said, there are two hypotheses that depression is a risk factor for Alzheimer's, or that depression is one of the very early first symptoms of Alzheimer's before any cognitive decline becomes apparent. I personally believe that these two theories do not necessarily exclude each other. And it is now known that there is a lot of inflammation in the brains of people suffering from depression. So obviously inflammation is the common denominator between depression and Alzheimer's. And I believe it's very important for people treating for doctors that are treating patients suffering from depression to warn them about their risk for Alzheimer's, and also physicians that are treating people with depression that occurs in the later decade of life, for example, in the late 50s, doctors should be aware that depression at that age may be a very early first symptom of Alzheimer's, because this would lead to an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and this would provide the patient with an increased chance of reversing the disease. So this is what I wanted to offer in terms of contributing factors to Alzheimer's. And now for the final section of this module, I would like us to talk about prevention. And I wanted to discuss first what Alzheimer's is and what are the causes of Alzheimer's identified so far, because I believe that without understanding the cause of the disease, the root cause of the disease, we cannot possibly create a workable prevention strategy. I honestly believe that our best chance in fighting Alzheimer's is via prevention. Once the disease is officially diagnosed by a doctor and the symptoms have become apparent, it's much harder to reverse it. And I am aware that Dr. Dale Bretson has managed to reverse Alzheimer's in certain patients. But unfortunately, until now, these have been isolated cases. Our best chance of fighting the disease is preventing it. And one of the most important takeaways from this module for you is that the accumulation of beta amyloid, so all these neurological processes that lead to Alzheimer's, they start in the brain 20 to 30 years before cognitive deficit becomes apparent. Which means that in our 30s, in our early 40s, this is the best time to start preventing Alzheimer's. And I know that I'm 41, and I know that in our early 40s, our priorities are a bit different than preventing what looks like an old people's disease. We are focused on raising a family, on developing our careers, or on launching a business, on having hobbies and traveling the world and gaining all these beautiful experiences. But without a plan for preventing a neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's, all these beautiful things in our lives may be crashing down at some point. And we really don't want to be that person who no longer remembers the name of our children or our parents, who no longer remembers the important events of our lives or what we had for breakfast this morning. And we don't want to be that person who is being committed to a nursing home by our children. We really want to do everything in our power not to get there. But for this, we need to become aware now, in our 40s, in our late 30s, of our risk for Alzheimer's. And as we are going to see in the second module, it's not just people who carry the so-called Alzheimer's risk, which are in fact at risk of developing Alzheimer's. We all are. Alzheimer's is essentially a disease heavily related to our lifestyle choices. And in this Alzheimer's prevention course, my aim, my objective is to provide you with all the necessary tools specifically adapted for Alzheimer's, so that you can do and you can start this prevention plan as soon as possible. I believe that there is a huge difference between saying I'm eating healthy as a general principle and I'm eating healthy to prevent Alzheimer's, because eating healthy for preventing Alzheimer's means eating certain fruits which are anti-inflammatory, means avoiding certain products which may contain heavy metals or trans fats, and it's the same for sleeping. It's one thing to say that I believe I'm sleeping enough and I have a very good quality of sleep, but when we think that it's only by sleeping that our brain gets the chance to cleanse itself from the beta amyloid, the stakes are a lot higher, I believe. Anyway, we are going to talk about all these things in the next modules. In the second module, we are going to specifically talk about the so-called Alzheimer's gene, the genetic risk for Alzheimer's, and why we should definitely not be afraid of it. I feel very honored, and I would like to thank you for doing this Alzheimer's prevention course with me, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next module. Stay in brain power, everyone. Bye.